All right. So family systems, um, the reason we go over this uh, in in theories is to just kind of give you a basic intro to family systems. You should have an entire class on family systems alone. That's how important it is. But as you can see from your notes that, there are a ton of theorists. Each one has their own theory for family systems. So family systems is a broad concept, and it includes a whole category of theories just for families. Um, so this is kind of your overview for it, and then you're actually going to have an entire class on it. But I do want to kind of talk about my own experience. And so, you know, um, family family counseling is really kind of I don't know, an experience unto itself. Um, and so I I used to do all types of different family counseling. I consulted with CYS. I had a private practice. I had, you know, worked for an agency. Um, but I would say that most times, not all the time, most times, the reason families are involved in counseling is because a child becomes a designated client. And so maybe a school system or children and youth or something gets involved, and, the family is brought in because of a child. Um, and, you know, Unfortunately, the child is often the designated client. Uh, However, you know, in most cases, yeah, the child probably has some issues they need to deal with. But I would say, in most cases, it's a family systems problem. Uh, the child is not the only one who needs counseling. They're kind of the result of a need for counseling. Um, and many times the family does not want counseling. Uh, Oftentimes, it's required by whatever agency is involved. Um, and you know, but it's rare that a family says, "Hey, let's go to counseling," you know? Because if they need counseling, there's something dysfunctional going on. And so that's a rare case. It's fantastic if they actually do say, "Hey, let's take the family to counseling." But it rarely happens. They're rarely in support of it. So it makes the entire process difficult. Um, because, part of the process needs to be your clients need to buy into the process. They need to commit themselves to the process. And if they're resistant, it makes it more difficult. You can use family counseling, family systems theories with individuals or with just the kids or with just one member of the family. Um, and that often occurs when they realize, hey, this isn't working for me with my family. Uh, but, you know, the only person you can help to change is your client. And then they're going to have to see, well, how am I going to make this work in a dysfunctional family system? Um, and no family's perfect. Every family, because every individual has their own issues. So imagine every individual having their own issues and then throwing them together to live in one house or more. Uh, and it just magnifies all of those individual issues because they begin interacting in unhealthy ways. Um, so, uh, yeah, some people, this is their calling. They want to work with families. Um, that is for better counselors than me. I have to admit it. Um, but I've done it many times, but uh, you know, give me severe psychosis any day, and I'm happy. All right. So the interesting thing in the notes, the first therapist you're going to see is Alfred Adler. And if you remember way back to the beginning of the semester when we talked about, you know, Adler was the very first person to think about the family system, the family constellation, he would call it. And he looked at it a little beyond birth order, he looked at kind of, the family constellation in a little bigger picture. Um, but that's why we list him as one of the first family systems therapists. But since we already talked about Adler, we're not going to talk about him again tonight. So we're going to move on to the other therapists. And in the notes, I didn't group them together like feminist therapy because each one adds their own twist. Each one has their own theory, whereas in feminist theory, they all work together to build a more comprehensive umbrella. Um, and even though they each contributed their own ideas. Um, but in this case, they each had their own brand of family therapy. Um, so and we're just going to talk about each one, but the one you're going to use most for your exam is Murray Bowen. And that's because he outlined the classic concepts in family systems theory. Um, and so we're going to look at his concepts, and next week, we'll talk about how to apply this to Sam specifically. But you can be thinking about that. So his theory is called multi-generational family systems theory, and multi-generational because he saw how dysfunctional attributes got passed down from generation to generation. And like I said, he really defined how to look at a family system and all of the different attributes and figure out how it wasn't working. But he didn't really outline specific techniques on how to make changes. Awareness of the issue led to change. And so, for instance, if he talked about triangulation, they would talk about, okay, how is triangulation playing out in this family? And they talk about it and process it. And then that would lead to how are we going to break this cycle so that it doesn't continue? What would a healthy family look like in this respect? So that's kind of how he used his theory. But he had 8 concepts, okay? And, each one is kind of a different kind of dysfunctional attribute, you know. And most families have all of them. It's not just, oh, well, this family's dealing with triangulation. No, they're dealing with all of them. Uh, so let's talk about number one, differentiation of the self. All right. So, um, he believes that it's good to have independence of self. That's a positive thing. We should be differentiated. Um, so I read this book. You've probably heard of it. It's by a guy named Khalil Gibran. It's called The Prophet. And in the book, uh, the prophet goes to this village, and the villagers ask him different questions about life, and he writes them an answer. And so one of the questions is, what is marriage? And, we can picture that as what is a relationship, whether you're married or not, what's, a significant relationship. And the answer was that a significant relationship is like a temple with many pillars. And the two people in the relationship are pillars, and they are holding up the temple roof. And if they stand too close together, it can't support the outer roof and it will collapse. And if they're too far apart, it won't support the center of the roof and it'll collapse. So they have to be just close enough together and just far enough apart to balance this shelter, which is the family. And that's a really nice visualization of healthy differentiation, according to Bowen. Because, you know, I think later on they would call, if you're undifferentiated, they would call that codependency. Okay. And there's a great book called Codependent No More, or Codependency No More, by I think you pronounce it Beatty or Betty. That's the last name. And yeah, it is a great book for every counselor to read. There are other ones that use a similar title just to sell their books, but just get the original one. And you can get them used. There are millions of copies sold. So you can get them used for $3 and $3 for shipping. Codependent or Codependency No More. See which one it is. Codependent or Codependency by Beatty or Betty. Codependent No More. So the fake is Codependency No More, and the real one's Codependent No More. Yeah. I hate it when people do that. And how do you spell the last name? Beattie. So I would say Beatty. That's Melanie or Melody? Melody Beatty. Yeah. Walmart, $4. $4 make you holla. There you go. All right, that's a bargain. So, all right. So Bowen talks about the undifferentiated self, and that's when individuals fuse with other emotional patterns and people in the family. And it's usually the significant other, but it doesn't have to be. And so, you know, the weird thing is, people grow up and they see, it could be their two parents, or it could be one of their parents and a new significant other, a step parent or whatever. And but they see how that relationship plays out. And that's how else do we learn what a relationship is if it's not, from the people we grow up with? That's the only relationship we learn about. So we don't really learn what a really healthy relationship looks like sometimes. And so that's why it's multi-generational. But if you think about it, when we think about undifferentiated self, people are either fused. And so, by fused, I mean that one individual gets how they feel about themselves from feedback from the other person, the significant other. And so, if you think about Gloria, I think she would fit this, because she really didn't have really positive self-acceptance, you know. Uh, she didn't think, oh, I deserve unconditional love and acceptance from others. I'm a human being. I make mistakes. I learn. I grow from my mistakes, and I accept myself for who I am. And other people need to accept me for who I am as well. That wasn't happening with Gloria. Okay. So a differentiated person would think that way. And, but an undifferentiated person like Gloria, uh, she thought that she had to meet other people's conditions in order to be accepted and loved. Okay. And that might be for who she is or not. She might have to change who she is in order to be accepted. And that's conditional acceptance. It's not unconditional acceptance. But she was getting her self-worth from what other people said about her or to her, or whether other people accepted her or not. So her self-worth was dependent on other people's acceptance. So that's dependency. That's an undifferentiated self. And so, you know, uh, people are happy when other people give them compliments or affirm what they're doing. People are, unhappy if they're criticized or judged or not accepted or rejected in some way. And, but many times, if you think about parents who are codependent, uh, they might not accept their child unconditionally either. They might place conditions for acceptance upon their child as well. So, and that could mean anything. It could be, you know, are you doing well academically in school? Do you play a sport? You know, are you popular? Whatever it might be, do you go hunting with me? Whatever it is. Um, but you kind of have to fit a mold. You have to meet conditions in order to be accepted. So they can never truly be themselves or accept themselves for who they are genuinely. But that's what they begin to learn. And so they realize that in order to be in a successful relationship, they have to meet other people's conditions in order to be accepted as well. So the weird thing is, that individuals who are codependent tend to meet each other and get together all the time. And you know, the like I would be a therapist at an agency, and uh I'd be talking with another therapist. And, we would have treatment team. We would be allowed to talk about our clients. But, our clients would end up meeting each other and having a relationship. And, it's because they were both codependent. Many times, one person in a codependent relationship is addicted to something. It could be alcohol, it could be drug, it could be anything, gambling, whatever it might be. And the other is an enabler. And so, in a 12-step program, they might be going through 12 steps, but, you know, they jokingly say the 13th step is when you find a relationship in a 12-step program. And that's because they're codependent, but they're also substituting love, attraction, sex for the addiction. Yeah. So they're getting that chemical buzz in their mind from the new relationship and sexuality, which is taking the place of the addiction temporarily. Um, yeah. So if we let me just give you an example of how this might play out. Um, and triangulation, number two. And I give you the definition of triangulation in the notes, but I also give you an entire page just on triangulation. But triangulation uh, usually occurs in a two-person relationship, and when they begin to experience turmoil, disagreement, or anxiety, they may bring in a third uh, because that diffuses the problems between the two individuals. And so let me give you an example of how this might play out. So, child grows up in a family where those parents are codependent, and the becomes an adult over 18 and goes to work or whatever, college, whatever, and ends up meeting somebody. And, you know, all the other people they met, it just didn't feel comfortable. But this person, it's like they've known them all their lives. It's like they know what to do to make the other person happy. And they feel accepted, and the other person compliments them and makes them feel good about themselves. So the other person makes them feel good instead of them just feeling good about themselves without the other person. And so they begin, and relationships, codependent relationships, tend to move very quickly, faster than the average relationship. People want things to happen because not only do they feel good in that relationship, they're getting their needs met, they're being complimented, they're feeling good about themselves because the other person is complimenting them or affirming them or validating them or whatever it might be. But they also feel very comfortable with this other person because they grew up as a child in observing a codependent relationship. So they know the rules of a codependent relationship. So things might happen very quickly. They might move in together very quickly. And, they might have, living together is a brand new thing. Wow, that's spending a lot of time with another person. They have to take on bills and responsibilities and, you know, they have to learn to live with another person. And there might be some turmoil. And then they say, well, you know what? We're living together and let's get married, and then they get to plan a celebration and everything's good for a while. And then they have the wedding and, and then things calm down. There's this lull and the same issues begin to arise. And, you know, and maybe one is drinking a little more than they used to. Uh, or who knows? Maybe they met in a bar. Maybe they met at a frat party. Who knows? But, it's beginning to bother the other person a little bit. And, after 6 months, people begin to be themselves. You see who the real person is. And so, triangulation begins. And wow, isn't this puppy or kitty so cute? And everybody agrees, yeah, let's bring the puppy home. And great surprise and wonderful, but then they have to house train the puppy and they're working and then they got to walk the puppy. And puppy's great, when you're feeling lonely and jumps on the couch and hangs out with you. But, you know, puppies grow up and they can cause some stress because there are more responsibilities. And, you know, and then, they begin to experience anxiety and turmoil in their relationship and, you know, uh, wow, let's have a child. And uh, wow, they're looking forward to that child for 9 months. And children do not relieve anxiety. Surprise, you know? Children keep you up all night. Children are expensive. Children create anxiety, even though we love children. And so it adds more tension to the relationship. And arguing actually gets worse. And sometimes, in order to avoid the arguing, they might cut off the other person emotionally and act like roommates. So it doesn't hurt them in the same way. And they stop arguing, but they're no longer close emotionally. They're no longer fused because they are no longer being validated. And so they go on and live that way for a little while. And then, you know, one of the people says, you know, I've got this friend and we can really talk. Tell my friend all my problems. And, you know, believe it or not, it's like they've known that friend all their lives. And the friendship begins to turn romantic. So they have somebody else, so they're never left alone. They begin a new relationship before the old relationship ends. And because they're feeling validated again, they're feeling comfortable again, everything's going to be great. And then they end the other relationship and they jump totally into the new relationship and it moves too fast. And believe it or not, the same exact thing keeps happening time after time. And that's the cycle. So yeah, that's what happens. Uh, the first, they have to begin to realize that this is a cycle. And we begin to look at all of these different dimensions. So we've talked about differentiation of self. We've talked about codependency, triangulation. Let's look at some of the other terms. The nuclear family emotional system. Uh, it's basically relationship patterns that governs where problems develop in a family. Uh, patterns, um, and see if I gave you the triangulation. Yeah, there's also a whole page just on the nuclear family emotional system. So there's one on triangulation and there's one on the nuclear family emotional system that go into detail. And then uh, the family projection process. And that is the way parents transmit their emotional problems onto a child. The projection process begins to impair the functioning of one or more children, increases their vulnerability, their clinical symptomology, and that's when a child becomes the identified client. Um, it's so easy to see, you know. I think, oh, hey, I'm pretty healthy and I've dealt with a lot of my issues, but I can see, you know, myself being played out in how my children interact with each other. And I'm like, wow, do I still do that? Thought I broke that cycle in myself. Obviously, I didn't. I hear my kids saying what I said. I'm like, did I really say that? It's so easy to pass these things down to children. Just like Bandura said, they are professional observers. Um, you could teach a child anything, but they're still going to rely more on what you do than what you say. So modeling is more what you do than what you say. Um, Emotional cutoff, I kind of gave you a little example of that. Um, It's describing people managing unresolved emotional issues with parents, siblings, significant others, family members by reducing or totally cutting off emotional contact with them. You can live as roommates for a long time and you could have a dialogue, but it's more about, oh, okay, did you get the car inspected? You know, it's more logistical. There's there's a lack of emotion to it because they don't want to argue and they don't want to get hurt. Um, but they're gradually drifting apart in the relationship. Multi-generational transmission process, that's passing these cycles and dysfunction down to children and children starting their own relationships. And with every generation, the dysfunction tends to get worse. Sibling position, Bowen talks about sibling position in a little more detail than Adler. And, you know, it's also not as concrete as Adler, you know, but he might say, okay, so you're the middle child. How's that play out for you with an older sibling and a younger sibling? Maybe they'll say, well, sometimes I feel ignored, or sometimes I feel caught in the middle, or sometimes I feel like a peacekeeper, however it plays out. But he wants to understand the dynamics and the feelings that come with sibling position in that specific family. Um, he does predict certain characteristics. And then the last one is societal regression. And, this is where you can take Bowen's theory and apply it to any system. Like you can apply it to Winnie the Pooh. You can apply it to your work environment. And, you know, there's a lot of dysfunctional working environments out there. Let's see. So those are Bowen's 8 concepts. And yeah. So questions about Bowen before we go to the next theorist. Any examples? Anybody see this stuff playing out? Yeah.
That in addictions comes and I think that's one of the reasons why they say that in addiction they shouldn't get into relationships until
Yeah, addictions. Yeah, you shouldn't be in a new relationship, start a new relationship.
what other situations do you see pregnancy?
Pick any relationship.
With their children, adult children.
Yeah, sure.
It could be pretty much in
Any type of relationship. Yeah.
And if you have a client who's resistant to acknowledging their codependency, what strategies would you use to get them to see that they're actually
Whenever you use the word resistant, we talk about the resistance.
difficult for them to see that they're actually
Yeah, sure. Yeah. And we talk about the resistance. Yeah, what would it mean if it was true?
And I think one of the resistance, well, I'm just speaking from my own perspective, is the person might feel like they're losing part of their identity and part of who they are because they've been in this sort of situation for so long that it's become part of them. That if they lose them and they stop being codependent, then they're losing themselves.
Yeah, they might in codependency, if they realize it and they're supposed to differentiate, then the problem is it's not are they losing themselves? It's who are they without it? And they've never figured that out because they've always tried to please others and meet other people's expectations. They've never actually figured out who they are. So they might feel like they're losing part of their identity, but in reality, no, they're losing somebody else's identity that was placed upon them. Yeah, it's interesting. And sometimes we're losing our parents' identity that they placed upon us as children. Oh, my dad was a great soccer player, but always wanted to be a professional. And then, how much money does that dad put into the kid's sports? And the kid feels all this pressure to succeed. But really, the father's playing out his own dream. Might not have anything to do with the kid's dream. Vicariously, yeah. Yeah.
My
So
family's pretty steeped in codependency, and so unlearning that is not a great time.
yeah, unlearning it.
What's really funny too is dating. If I'm immediately attracted to somebody, I back up because I'm like, whoa, hang on. If this easy and this is interesting, it's probably bad. So let me step back and analyze this because that I have to really question that because it's really deeply embedded. It's just becoming aware of it so you can
Yeah. So attraction becomes a strange thing. Like people are attracted to people that may be totally unhealthy, and we're attracted for all different reasons, you know? So, you know, one relationship doesn't work, and then they try a new relationship. It's literally the same relationship with a different person. Yeah. Yeah.
You can see that in domestic as well. When you talk to victims of domestic violence, they sort of end up with the same sort of person, but in a different
Yeah.
It's almost like the abuser is attracted to this person for some reason, or they're attracted to each other because of their needs or their brokenness. They commiserate on something on the level that makes them attracted to each other.
Oh, I can change them. Ah, I can change them. You need to change. You need to be a better person. You can't do this anymore. Nobody can change anybody. We have to change ourselves. It's a tough lesson to learn. Can't change them.
I feel like I've also seen like this codependent thing on like I watch a lot of shows about like food addictions, like the people in, like 600 Pound Life and 1,000 Pound Life and stuff. And I feel like the people that they're with are always the enablers. And then they leave them and they get the surgery and then they end up with the same person who enables them again and they gain all the way back again.
Well, so the interesting thing, if you have, what is it, gastric bypass surgery, um, so there's been a lot of studies where individuals have that surgery and they actually shift their addiction to something else afterward. So they become alcoholics or some drug or gambling or something like that. Yeah.
Extreme.
Mm-hmm.
The question is, why do you watch those?
It's just something. I don't know. I like the show. The Thousand Sisters on they're just funny. They're like kind of like trashy and funny. And then I don't know, 600 Pound Life. I like the doctor. He's such like a little
Yeah,
star.
he's funny.
Doctor now. He's funny.
You know what? I'm gonna make a confession. I did have the gastric bypass, and before we had that, well, that was years ago.
Yeah,
But we have to go through psychology.
sure. Yeah, I know the whole process.
They enough to go through this because it does change your brain chemistry, and transfer addictions are actually real.
Yeah, and most people want the surgery so bad they know how to lie on the psychological exams. Yeah,
and then you pick up something
Yeah.
is vicious.
Yeah. No, they need to talk about it. Yeah. Yeah. Hmm? Yeah, it's a big issue.
They can be that but I'm going to that's right myself. Becoming alcoholics.
Yeah. Yeah, it's usually alcohol. Yeah, usually liquor.
The stomach has been bypassed, and so they're not able to take the volumes of liquids, so they
Yeah.
just get the effect of it. But then the effect doesn't last very long because the gut has been shortened, and so they have to take more and more to get the effect. And,
Yeah. It's a major complication. All right. Any examples or talk or questions from online about that theory? All right. Usually in a class, somebody says, "That's my relationship." All right. So Virginia Satir, you can include Virginia Satir in your exam, but Murray Bone has to be the primary one. And so I really like Virginia Satir. She's got all kinds of videos on YouTube. And but so yeah, you can watch Virginia Satir, Human Validation Process. And she was just a good therapist. Um, and she really interacted with the clients. And she was tough, you know. Uh, but she would see relationships as being either functional or dysfunctional communication patterns. And that's why it's called, human validation process model, but it's all about communication for her. Um, I used to know this woman, one of my significant others' moms. She was from like Germany, and you know, so sometimes she would say some funny things, and so she knew some counseling terms, and you know, uh, she said, "For years, I thought you were saying we were just a functional family, and I was okay with that, but it's dysfunctional." Yeah. So, but the hard truth. Yeah. So, yeah, defensive stances in coping with stress. So placating, it's kind of like losing oneself to make another person happy. Um, blaming, uh, blaming takes the responsibility away from ourselves and puts it onto another person, but it never resolves anything. It only worsens the effect of whatever was done. Being super reasonable is actually striving for control. Let me explain this to you. Yeah. Or absolutely, irrelevant behavior is really like distractions. Um, to move away from a disagreement or a lack of communication. Uh, she came up with all of the different family roles. This is what she's really famous for. So, if you've talked with families of addiction, it's really been picked up by addiction treatment. Everybody in the family takes on a role, and one might be the scapegoat, and one might be the peacekeeper, and one might be, the super smart person who gets all A's or the successful person, but everybody's got a role in the family. And if one of those roles changes, the whole family dynamic falls apart. Because maybe somebody doesn't want to be in that role. Maybe that's not who they are. She had techniques like family sculpting and family reconstruction. And she would move people around and reorganize them. Like the family might be sitting in a circle, and she might have different people sit next to each other, or one person put their arm around another person, or sit in front of each other. Or it was constantly moving to demonstrate communication patterns within the family or to bring out how people felt with each other in the family. Do they feel uncomfortable? Do they feel more comfortable? What are the communication dynamics? Family sculpting could be really dramatic as well. You could, um, you know, maybe somebody's verbally abusive, but they don't understand how that really hurts another person. And so they ask the victim of a verbal abuse to sculpt what they feel when somebody's verbally abusive or psychologically abusive. And they might sculpt somebody with a raised fist, screaming, and them in a corner going like this. And, it feels as if, there is physical violence there. It hurts them in many ways. And then reconstruction, what are healthy ways of communication and practicing that? But also, what would it look like, you know, to be healthy? Resculpt it. But it doesn't have to be as dramatic. You could talk about healthy communication patterns and restructuring them as well. That's a general intro to Virginia. Um, Carl Whitaker, he's in most books, uh, but he just got famous because he was a good family therapist. Um, he like doesn't focus on any specific theory, but he made a lot of demonstration videos and he did, he was a very active person in the field. He became well known. Um, but you know, his goal was really family member authenticity and in counseling and in the counseling session. I guess the term he's famous for is family secrets. Everybody in a family knows what not to tell their friends, what not to talk about outside of the family. Nobody has to say, we don't talk about that. Everybody somehow knows. And, you know, so exploring those family secrets, you know, um, he might create turmoil in the family session in therapy to see how it plays out and to process what just happened. And he might use a co-therapist to do it. So, he might look to the co-therapist and he said, "Oh my gosh, can you believe the way that guy is treating his wife? What would your wife do if she was treated so disrespectfully?" And then the co-therapist would say, "Oh, I don't know if I'd have a wife after that." And so the family would be listening to this dialogue, and they're talking about the family. So it is kind of entertaining, and families will get all pissed off about it, you know. Um, so it was kind of neat. Uh, let's see. Salvador Minuchin, I think his name made him famous. Uh, but he talked about the family, what is the family structure? And he came up with all types of different family maps and like what are the coalitions? Who has the power? Who's isolated? And they would draw out these maps together with the family, and they would replay family conflicts that happened outside of the session in the session. And they would talk about misunderstandings and create new frameworks of understanding so that each person understood how the other person was thinking about a conflict or a situation. Um, let's see. Jay Haley, wife Chloe Madden's, they got divorced. Um, so the one thing that I will say is that when couples come into me for couples counseling, which is kind of a different thing, and yet incorporates a lot of these family systems concepts, the first thing I say is, I want you to be happy and healthy as individuals. Now, that might mean staying together, or it might not, you know. But the goal of this therapy is, you know, finding meaning and authenticity and happiness as individuals. You know, it's not to keep you together at any cost. Um, the the problem with couples therapy is very few people go to couples therapy at the beginning of a relationship. They wait till the relationship is almost over and it's a crisis, or somebody's cheated, or somebody's an addict, or, you know, they're about to end the relationship. And this is a last ditch effort to save the relationship. And usually one person is just doing it for the other person or to say, I tried everything. See? Uh, so, you know, couples counseling, you know, it's a difficult thing because they're not at a good place. Um, all right. Uh, so they also, Jay and Chloe, they focused on power structures within families. Um, and but the things that I included after the notes, don't just read the notes. I included a whole bunch of other stuff. I included um, genogram symbols. And the genograms are something I do with every family that I work with, even couples. And you know, it's really interesting because um, if you do 3 or 4 generations and you include things like addiction, you'll see a line of addiction going back 3 or 4 generations. Um, you know, you'll see uh, people will realize, oh, wow, there's a whole line of breast cancer in every female in this family. And then they need to go get tested, you know. So there's all kinds of really interesting things that happen when you do a genogram, things that they don't really realize. There's a history of depression, maybe, a history of anxiety, a history of abuse, whatever it might be. But you'll see all kinds of interesting things. A there's only one book called Genograms, and you might think that it's going to be a really boring book. Oh, how do you create a genogram? But they create genograms for famous people and like the Kennedys or Abraham Lincoln's family or royalty. And so it's really an interesting book to read. And you'll see how they map out each famous family in the book. And but I think doing genograms with individuals or families is really helpful. The next thing that I included was I had to write a paper when I was a master's student for my family systems class. And I included so many of these theories and I provided them to you as samples. So you can read my own theory, cybernetic epistemology, family systems theory, that I like. Um, and then, so I provided a real client. The names have been changed. Um, and so this was a real case. And I apply all different family systems theory to this client. I do history and presenting problems, psychological history, family systems, theory. And then I do like all of the different maps that those theorists used, family structural mapping, hierarchy and power. And I did both the current unhealthy pattern and the optimal pattern that we were working towards. Um, I did boundary functioning. I did coalitions. I did alliances and conflicts, effective relationships. I talked about the interventions I would use, treatment planning, goals, objectives, resource allocations. And the last thing is I drew a genogram of the family so that you'll know exactly what a genogram looks like. And if you actually watch this lecture to the end, you'll know that you can get 2 extra points if you put a genogram at the end of your exam for Sam. And it needs to have a legend that talks about all of the different emotional connections. And I gave you an example of that. I also included a timeline of critical of life events, both positive and negative. And I like doing this with the family as well because they tell me so many different life events. It's hard for me to keep track of them. So we create a timeline with all the big events in their lives, positive or negative, so that they can kind of map it out themselves. All right, that is family systems. Questions, comments? It's a lot. That's why they have an entire class on it.
I think you mentioned Virginia Satir. So should we mention her and both?
Murray Bowen. Yep. Yep. And it even says it in the question. It'll say use Murray Bowen and maybe a little Virginia Satir, but primarily Murray Bowen. Yeah, you don't have to use Virginia Satir. You have to use Murray Bowen.
You said if we add that at the end, so you would want like that and like the stuff underneath of it.
Yeah.
Nothing there, do you want that too, like the timeline?
No, the timeline's a separate thing. Just a genogram and the legend. Yeah. It might be the difference between rewriting it or not. How about online? Questions? All right.